What's up, YouTube? This is Too Raw for TV. All right, so up until yesterday, it had been limited. This talk of a third Trump term had been limited only to Trump's most rabid supporters who want a king in place, a monarch in office, um, or had been some of his most devoted surrogates in Washington, Congress people, senators, some prognosticators who on some of these talk shows or talking shows, somebody even in his administration, former administration officials like Steve Bannon. But yesterday you heard it from Trump's mouth himself in an interview with Kristen Welker, who was absolutely delicious to look at, by the way. I was going to say something else, but in an interview with Kristen Welker of NBC News, Trump confirms that he is not joking about the possibility of serving a third term, saying although he is focused right now on his current term, there are ways to circumvent the 22nd Amendment and serve a possible third term. All right. Now, these are my opinions of this situation, right? Me personally, I've always felt that the 2-term limit was not enough. I've felt that it should be 3 terms or 2 5-year terms. I just thought that for what a president's trying to accomplish, that it's very difficult, especially in today's day and age, to get so much accomplished when you're spending so much time worrying about and prepping and preparing to run for office every 2 to 3 years and trying to raise money and dealing with donors and going to all these different functions and trying to raise money. It takes away from actually governing, I should say, for the American people. But look, at the same time, right, what I think is what I think. And it has always bothered me how many Trump supporters over the last 10 plus years have been projecting their own viewpoints onto others. Like I remember in 2016, when he was running against Hillary Clinton, I remember Trump supporters were saying, Obama is going to cancel the election. If it looks like Trump's going to win, he's going to cancel the election and he's going to declare martial law and he's going to be a dictator and he's going to stand off, which I knew was bullshit. I knew it wasn't going to happen. Well, all I heard in that was what you motherfuckers would do if y'all were in that same situation. That's what you guys would do. And I have to say that the actions of his supporters and Trump's people himself over the past 10 years have more than confirmed what I thought about them. But that's not to say that Democrats are some angels. They're not. Because I'm seeing so many of these motherfuckers whining and crying about the election being rigged, 2020, Elon Musk rigged it. Y'all just as bad as them. But we're talking about this 3-term crap. Look, George Washington, the first president post Constitution, right? I mean, we had presidents before that with the weak Articles of Confederation, but that was a different structure of government. And George Washington is our first president, okay? George Washington was so popular. Both times he ran unopposed. There was really effectively no political parties when George Washington served for the balance of his presidency, for the most part. And he could have been a king. He was so popular and so beloved by those who could vote at the time that he had the option of serving for the rest of his life, which would have wound up being only 10 years. But still, the option was there. But he chose to serve for 2 terms. And for the most part, with very few exceptions, his successors honored that 2-term tradition from the 1790s all the way to the 1930s. Now, there were a few exceptions, unsuccessful exceptions. For instance, Ulysses S. Grant, who served from 1869 to 1877, served 2 terms, attempted to be renominated for a 3rd term in 1880 by the Republican Party that failed. They nominated a man named James A. Garfield, the same James A. Garfield that sadly was assassinated just months into his term. And then you have Theodore Roosevelt, who served from 1901 to 1909, essentially 2 terms, but he became president after the death of his boss at the time, William McKinley, the president. Theodore Roosevelt was vice president. One of the main reasons Theodore Roosevelt became vice president is because he had become very, very unpopular with New York Republicans, Roosevelt being the governor of New York. So they thought that if they kicked him to the vice presidency, which at that time was a largely ceremonial role and job, not very powerful, that they would, put Roosevelt in a position where he's not as, in their eyes, damaging because they didn't like his progressive policies or his domineering personality. But unfortunately, with the vice presidency, even though it can be a very insignificant job, especially back then, you are 1 heartbeat away from the presidency. And that heartbeat of McKinley stopped in 1901, and Roosevelt ascended to the presidency. But Theodore Roosevelt made a blunder. He made a blunder on election night 1904 when he trounced Alton B. Parker, beat him in a landslide. At the time, one of the biggest landslides in American history. Roosevelt, feeling whatever he was feeling at that time, a swell of pride or whatever, he made a pledge that he would not run for president in 1908. Now, remember, at the time, there was no 2-term limit, and technically, Roosevelt had not been elected president in 1901. Although, well, I don't want to get into that. I don't want to bog this down with too many details. He lived to regret making that pledge. Ultimately, he was very dissatisfied with William Taft's policies, Taft was much more conservative than Roosevelt, rolling back many of Roosevelt's progressive policies and initiatives. And ultimately, Roosevelt ran unsuccessfully for president in 1912, third party, although it was the most successful third party candidacy in the history of the country. He actually finished second in the popular vote in Electoral College. But those are 2 exceptions. Now, Franklin Roosevelt, of course, was the exception. He was elected 4 times to the presidency, dying 82 days into his 4th term. Now, this is where it's political. The Republicans were the ones who pushed for the 22nd Amendment. They're the ones that pushed for the 22nd Amendment, which limit the amount of terms that a president could serve. They didn't want another they didn't want another Franklin Roosevelt in the White House. At that time, the Republicans were the minority party in this country, right? And they kind of felt like, man, if we get another Roosevelt in the White House, a very popular Democrat, man, we may never see the presidency again for another 20 years. So Republicans were behind this, right? But at the same time, you also had some bipartisan support for this. But, and I don't want to go into too many details, but the Democratic Party was making some changes there. So ultimately, there was enough support behind this measure to get the 22nd Amendment passed. Right? But what's funny about it is 35 years later, right, when Ronald Reagan was winning a 49 state landslide, all of a sudden Republicans said, well, maybe we were wrong about this amendment. Maybe we should repeal it because they wanted Reagan to run for a third term. I said, wait a minute. I remember reading about this when I was a kid. I said, wait a minute, man. So you guys were so against Theodore Roosevelt and the possibility of another Roosevelt rising from the Democratic Party. But then when Reagan has this immense popularity and you guys like him, oh, now you want him to run for a third term. So it's all bullshit, man. But look, this is the thing. Let's just say, for the sake of argument, that they were able to repeal the 22nd Amendment, which is not going to happen, by the way. The Trump Republicans don't have that support. They don't have enough support as far as votes in the Congress or whatever. It's just not going to happen, right? And there really aren't any ways that they could get around it. I mean, the 22nd Amendment clearly states that no man should be elected to presidency twice, more than twice. So I'm trying to figure out how they figure they can get around it. I mean, one thing I guess you could do is one thing you could do is have Trump serve out his term, right? Up until maybe 2028 and have him resign as president, have Elon Musk become president. Not Elon Musk, excuse me. J.D. Vance become president. Might as well say Elon's president. And then have Trump become vice president or something. Although I'm not even certain he could do that. But I think he could do that, right? And then have J.D. Vance become president. We'll hope that he becomes president in the 2028 elections. And then on inauguration day, after they're sworn in, J.D. Vance resigns and Trump becomes president that way. I think that could be a far-fetched, not going to happen in a million-year scenario. Because first of all, if you talk about firing up Democrats to run, to vote against you, because who's not going to see what they're trying to do if they do some shit like that? But I think this is all just a bunch of talk to fire up his supporters. And, I don't see Trump. I don't see how there's any possibility of him serving a third term. Not to mention the fact, not to be morbid here, but he's already 8 years old. And there's already signs of slippage with him. Other day he got lost as far as giving a speech, a teleprompter, almost like Biden shit. So, like, come on, man. But we got to be realistic here about where he is in the state of his life and where he is as far as his age anyway. You know what I'm saying? At some point, what the fuck? Y'all want a zombie Trump up there, man? Like, what the fuck are you doing, man? It's ridiculous. And by the way, if you do repeal, somehow, let's just say they did repeal the 22nd Amendment. Well, doesn't that make Obama eligible to run again? And do you really want that? Do you really want Obama to be eligible to run for president against Trump? And look, let me tell you something. As pissed off as people are about Obama, and I'm one of them, if it comes down to voting for Obama to get rid of Trump, I think a lot of people would hold their nose and do that shit. So, that's just how I look at that, man. And it honestly, it could even all come down to Obama, man. It could be Trump just trying to one up Obama by somehow, in his mind, trying to figure out a way to get a third term because, no other president except for FDR has done it and Obama didn't do it. I don't know, man. Same dealing with the crowd size and all that stupid shit. Man, that's all I got to say, bro, man. Tell me what you guys think.